Hello and welcome to this section of Autism Working. We're now going to go through some of the aspects of the thinking and learning profile in autism. So we have found in the research and clinical work that Tony and I have done over the years is that people with autism tend to have a fairly, what we might describe as unusual profile of thinking and learning abilities. And this can lead to both strengths in the workplace, but also at times a particular level of stress associated with workplace tasks. So we find that it's hugely useful to have some self-awareness of what our thinking and learning profile looks like in terms of both our strengths and our challenges. So this profile typically could include, for example, being very talented in logic and understanding the physical world, including having a very large long-term memory for particular facts and details associated with workplace tasks. There's also a tendency to be able to notice details that others miss, which is hugely useful in the workplace, and also to be able to remember and then arrange facts in a particular fashion. So the autistic mind is often a systematizing mind. They're systemizers. They love patterns, they recognize patterns, and can use that to good effect in a workplace where systems are so incredibly helpful for consuming large arrays of information, for example. That may be a particular talent. As we go through the talents and challenges, of course, not everyone on the autism spectrum will have each of these. These are just some that have been described and noticed, and as we go through them, you may resonate with some, you may feel that absolutely describes me, and others not so much. Some people have very huge difficulties, for example, with what we call executive functioning, and that's one of the areas that we'll go through today. That one is about how well we plan, prioritize, organize information, how well our working memory, focus and concentration works. But not everybody with autism struggles with these propensities, these difficulties. Sometimes the person on the spectrum can bring a great deal of thoughtfulness to a situation, which can be incredibly useful when they're allowed time to think about things. On other occasions though, it may be that you feel very stressed in a situation because you feel you don't have enough processing time to be able to contribute meaningfully. So processing time can be an issue. More time is needed in thought. Another aspect of thinking in autism can be perfectionism, which can be a wonderful asset, because if we're a perfectionist, we can become very, very good at something. But it can also mean it can be difficult to complete tasks at times because we have to work very hard to get it to our standard. But that may be a different standard to what the boss is actually looking for. So it can be difficult to let go of a task when it isn't ready in your mind, and it is ready in the mind of your manager or your boss. When problem solving, a person with autism can be extremely creative. They think outside the box, as it's described, or as a person with autism may say, what box? There's no box, it's all free, which is a wonderful way of being able to be open to a problem. However, another tendency in autism can be to have a one-track mind and to continue down one track to a point that becomes stressful for that person and not necessarily as productive, not resulting in the answers or the outcome that they're looking for. So it can be good to know, if you are a one-track person, to know how to change tracks and go on a different train of thought, a different problem-solving venture, should that be required in your work, in your workplace, or in any other problems that may come up in the working day at home or at work. There's also sometimes problems with what I was describing before, organizational abilities, such as determining what is going to be needed for the next task, being able to show up prepared for that, planning what to do, and then engaging in those actions in a sequence that will be helpful. There can be problems with time management, perceiving how much time it will take to do a particular task, and then being able to actually allow that amount of time in the diary can be a struggle. So fortunately, while we're going through the struggles that can come up with autism and executive functioning, there's also strategies, of course, in autism working that can address each of these aspects. But if we go through in a little more detail some of the difficulties with impaired executive functioning, as I was talking about before, this is where we can really struggle to organise our time, our belongings, and our activities. We can struggle with planning. We can actually have a huge difficulty remembering certain tasks, holding it in memory, and then being able to engage in those tasks. So this is a particular problem of auditory memory, of being able to hold instructional sets longer than 2 steps, for example, in what's required. It can sometimes be difficulty with impulse control. Just feel like doing it, do it, and not realizing, oh, inhibit that, I'm not going to do that right now, this is not the time. And that can mean we can become very scattered and disorganized because we're impulsively going from one task to another without completing any, and it becomes very overwhelming and hard to understand how we'll ever finish everything on time. We know as well, if we have difficulties with executive functioning, it's hard to self-reflect and self-regulate, and yet these capacities are very important to inform us about how we can go about doing the next task. To just monitor a little bit, how am I going? How's my concentration? Do I need to get up from my desk and take a break? Should I have a glass of water now? Am I thirsty, hot, cold, tired, etc.? When we can monitor our body and what's going on, we can give the body what it needs, and then our brains are going to be fueled by oxygen and obviously by the food that we eat, by having a rest, for example, which gives us the capacity for productive work and sustainability in the workplace. Unfortunately, many autistic employees can just work hour after hour after hour, but it becomes less productive, even though they're working very long hours, not necessarily working efficiently or effectively, because the body and the mind have started to seize up because they're not being looked after in the way that will sustain that work. Time management, as I said before, can be an issue. Just being aware of time passing and how long it takes can be a difficult one to read accurately in the working day. So having strategies for time management and prioritizing time can be really, really helpful in getting the work done in a way that's less stressful. Also, it can be hard for anyone on the autism spectrum to take on a new strategy. Change is not necessarily something that's embraced or feels comfortable. It can cause stress to try a new strategy. So we need to have some idea about how to manage that stress. How can I try a new strategy in a way that's going to be most helpful? And what does that look like? What sort of thoughts may I have to do that, for example? What do I need to do with my body to help it feel relaxed enough to approach a new strategy? And importantly, how do I inhibit a response that's not helpful? So, for example, someone on the spectrum can be extremely good at spotting errors. However, many people hate their errors being spotted and having those pointed out, especially in front of other people. So if that's a tendency, how do I inhibit that? How do I just keep that to myself and find another way of conveying that information, even if that's going to be useful? That is a question to ask as well. So many of the strategies that we're talking about today, working memory, inhibiting responses, can be addressed with good strategies. And of course, in Autism Working, we have in one of the next sections lots of strategies to be able to work on each of these areas. We know that the person on the spectrum will feel less overwhelmed and less confused if they have a strategy. But one of the things we can say categorically is the most important thing to do to assist your brain to be as capable, as productive, as efficient as possible is to utilize the relaxation strategies in Autism Working. Because if the body and the mind are more rested, in that rest and digest, we will have more capacity for our thinking strategies through the day, including organizational skills and planning. We know that working memory, as I described before, is sometimes a difficulty. It's hard to maintain and hold the information in our mind while we're solving a problem. But conversely, you may have an exceptional long-term memory for facts and information. And so it feels very strange to have this difficulty with auditory memory when you know you have a very, very good memory. But of course, there's different types of memory. and different parts of the brain that are involved in each part of memory. So you can easily have a very strong, very powerful long-term memory for a lot of information, but still struggle to remember instructions and ideas that someone has said. So we look at strategies for that. It can be difficult when we have problems with working memory to quickly forget a thought, and so sometimes you may be tempted to interrupt others, and in fact people with autism are notorious for interrupting others because it needs to be said before you forget it. So one of the strategies can be, how do I wait, or how do I record that thought so that there is enough airplay for others as well without interrupting. People can become very offended if there's a lot of interruptions. Now, one or two is going to be forgiven. It's just if it's a tendency, a capacity to keep doing it. Sometimes it can be difficult as well to switch attention from one task to another. This is that problem of having a single track mind. And that means that sometimes you might need closure on one activity to be successfully completed before you move on to another. So we suggest to you that in those situations, you, as much as you can, resist switching overly, and also balancing that against not always trying to hold on to closure. So it can be a problem of single track minded or moving from one task to another in a scatty way. What we're looking for, of course, is a balance between the two and a capacity for the person to have self-awareness of what their tendencies are. By the way, none of this is wrong or a mistake in the mind that these things happen. It's just that different minds work in different ways. And so what we're looking at is self-awareness about how your mind works and what's the best fit of that style of thinking, of that ability set to the tasks in front of you in a workplace. And so that if there's not a great fit for some things, which will happen, we have a set of strategies to adjust that thinking style or that thinking pattern. So we're able to find ways around, and we know our tendencies, we can stay self-regulated, and we can start to adjust our performance to assist with the task and help it happen in a good way for you and for your boss, for your manager. Sometimes that difficulty of single track mindedness can be difficult to think of alternative problem solving strategies. So it might be like being a train on a track. There's only one track and you may feel that is the right track, but the solution continues to be elusive. So what we suggest is, if that seems to be happening, to be aware of it on your own, or to be able to hear that being described to you. If that's something that your mentor or line manager is pointing out, it could be part of autism. And in that case, we would ask you to, as hard as it is, step away from that particular problem. Give yourself some breathing time, give yourself a time to just reset, relax if possible, using some relaxation strategies, for example, or having some meditation, and then coming back with a fresh mindset that doesn't necessarily need to be so determined to be on the same track you were before. And that can be really difficult to do, especially because when we're anxious, we become more and more rigid and that single track mindedness becomes more evident. But what we're looking for is to try and evolve more capacity for flexible problem solving, because that will probably be a lot more helpful in the workplace for you and lead to less stress and anxiety in the workplace for you. So trying to work on flexible problem solving is important. As I mentioned, there can be problems with self-reflection and self-monitoring. These issues become less of an issue the more we use relaxation and the more we meditate. So typical adults have a capacity, typical meaning non-spectrum or neurotypical, have a capacity to have a mental conversation with themselves in a calm way to solve the problem. It's called an internal thinking process. And that can be a dialogue or conversation about the merits of various options and solutions. that's something that's difficult often for someone with autism. A person with autism tends to think in pictures, and they're less likely to use an inner voice or a conversation to try to solve the problem. Instead, they may, as I said before, use an idiosyncratic way, which is particularly single-track minded, and we have sort of humorously called it the Frank Sinatra syndrome or my way. But doesn't always assist the problem. So being aware of this can be really, really helpful. And in that awareness, it's about, as much as possible, being open to other people's recommendations, thoughts and ideas. So the idea here is that certainly the person with autism has a fine brain, and applying that brain, that capacity to the problem, will be hugely helpful. But we're also aware that others, and the more diverse those other minds, the better, will add to a solution for whatever problem that there is. Being open to those other mind solutions will be really, really important in the workplace. Of course, there's an advantage in autism that many people with my way syndrome, if you like, Frank Sinatra syndrome, will come up with the most creative, the most out-of-the-box, original response that will probably solve the problem. So we need autism in the workplace. There's strengths there, there's capacity, but we're also saying be mindful that some of it comes at a cost, and that can cause stress in the workplace and also get in the way with good relationships with others in the workplace as well. So we encourage you to continue with your creativity and also be aware of where your thinking style can trip you up at times. We know that adults with autism have a tendency to focus on the individual component parts of a problem, but may have difficulty seeing the big picture. Another issue can be having the disadvantage of becoming too emotional about perhaps details that are not as significant as other details. So knowing this about oneself can help in managing those issues and realizing, oh, I've become overly focused on that detail and my emotion is out of context to what is needed at this time. And this will avoid a lot of internal frustration with more self-awareness. We now know over time of studying autism that the most significant advances in science and the arts have been attributed to people who are on the autism spectrum, that we need autism. And neurotypical people have a very social and linguistic way of thinking, but there's huge advantages to having the different perception that autism brings. So as one woman said to Tony, a woman with autism and considerable intellectual ability, language is a cage for thought. Isn't that interesting? So most advances in science and the arts have been actually achieved by alternative conceptualizations, not just the linguistic thinking process of neurotypical people. So in this program, we encourage you to, as objectively as possible, and with the help of people who know you and care about you, identify your own strengths, but also the challenges that you face in your thinking and your learning profile, and use this self-knowledge to inform your work practices, asking for help as you need it. Thank you.